Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. We're going to be doing a painting of a sunflower with a sunset in the wet sand. And I'm going to go ahead and list these colors that I'll be using for today's painting. I'm going to be using a 16 by 20 inch canvas, and I'm starting off with a flat brush, a 1 inch flat brush. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of go a third of the way up to start blocking in my sky. And I'm taking some cad yellow and white, and this is going to be where the brightest part of the sky is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and block that in. The nice thing about this painting is the background sky is going to be kind of blurred, so you don't have to put too much detail in it. As long as you're working somewhat quickly or spraying your paints with water just to keep them wet so you can get a nice blend with each color, that's really all you need, because most of the detail is going to be up in the flower. I did use a photo reference for some inspiration. I was really inspired by this photo that I came across, and it just really was beautiful the way that the flower was laying on the water, or I guess you know it's a wet sandy beach is what it is. But the way that it was sitting there with the sunset behind it just was so pretty, and I really wanted to capture that. And I loved the look of the sun rays coming down. So I didn't really copy it completely. The composition is pretty much the same, but I kind of just went with my own color palette. So it's not identical, but I will go ahead and list that picture in the description box in case you guys want to follow along and kind of have a general guide of what you're trying to get at. As you can see, I've got a blend from yellow, bright yellow, to like a more peach color, and now I'm going to go ahead and fade that up into kind of like a pretty pink color. So I've got some of that portrait pink mixed in there. And this side, as you can tell on the picture, is somewhat more yellow, so I'm just going to go ahead and blend that in. So just make sure that as you're transitioning from one color to the next, you're going over that line of where you are, blending things in at, just to get a nice blend overall. Because like I said, you kind of want it to look somewhat blurred in the background because you want the main focus to be up on the sunflower. So I'm going to take a little bit of that Indian yellow that I have and mix it in with my portrait pink. It's a little more orange tones on this side. And I like using the Indian yellow for that. It's just a really rich orangish yellow color. It's a pretty color, and it's also going to be really nice to use in with our sunflower. So I'm taking a little bit of white just to kind of use to blend those colors together with. And take a little bit more of your cad yellow just to kind of blend in the middle right there. So we're going to have to eventually transition into a purple or a violet color. So in between the purple, we want somewhat of a pink. So pick up some of that Naphthols red light and just blend that into the yellow area. And come all the way down with it, so that way you're not mixing purple in with the orange. It will give off a nice color, but you want to have a little bit more pink tones in there, so that way you don't end up with like a muddy brown color. So now I'm going to start incorporating the light blue violet. And we can just blend that right up into that melon color that we have. It's going to give you a really, really pretty lavender color. some red and some cerulean blue and a little bit of yellow. And we're gonna make kind of like a warm brown color. So just keep mixing those colors until you end up with a nice neutral color, but somewhat on the more red side. So that way we can go ahead and put in, these kind of look, I don't know exactly what it is. It looks like some sort of land back there in the picture, but it is really blurred. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put in just a general line back there, nothing too detailed, like I said. And I am going to do a very soft blend on this because it is gonna help with getting that soft blurred background effect. So don't be afraid to blend that in really good. So now I'm going to go ahead and start kind of mimicking those same colors that we have in the sky in our distant water. And there we go with that soft blend. Just keep going over that. So there's no hard edges. You don't want any hard edges. And I'm using that Indian yellow, a little bit of Naphthols red light. And you want just kind of like a really pretty pale peach color. So as you can see, I'm just pretty much mimicking the colors that we have in the sky. And I want more of a darker mauve color, somewhat similar to what we have in our land, in the distant land area. So just like a dark brownish mauve, we're gonna bring up in the very foreground of the painting. So you can actually use that color combination that we made up for the land, which was the blue, yellow, and red. And you can even add to that some of that light blue violet, just to kind of give it more of a purple hue. So just go ahead and work on that. I'm just kind of right now getting a layout of where I'm going to have the bright sun be, but I will touch that up later. So again, see, I'm just adding that light blue violet to that land color that we made up and just bringing it down. And you can have some variation in there. You don't have to have it be all one color. It's kind of good to have just a little bit of a variation, and just play around with it until you get it to the color that you want. So I've got burnt umber on my palette, and I mixed a little bit of some red in with it and some cerulean blue. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to look at the shadow, or not the shadow, the reflection in the water, and really try to just study your reference photo with this part. You want the shape to be correct, and you want the darker shadows to be on more of the left side. As you can see in the photo reference, there's darker shadows on the left side. So there is variation with the reflection. And I keep saying shadows, I mean reflection. I've switched to a smaller flat brush so I can have a little bit more control within the petals. And brown and adding some black later on up in the left part of the reflection of the flower. So just try to, I mean, if you study the photo, you can see that there's like some variation, like I said, between the colors of of the reflection. So just try to do your best at getting some variation in there. You don't want just all one color. I'm grabbing some black and I'm putting it into that dark purple mixture because I really want the part closest to the actual sunflower, the reflection closest to the sunflower at the base, to be much darker in color. And I'm also going to use it to kind of shape out the reflection, like shape out the flower. So just go ahead and start blocking that in, and you can see, like I said earlier, that these parts of the petals in the reflection are much darker. So I'm going to go ahead and start blocking in the middle part of the sunflower. So I've got Indian yellow, a little bit of olive green, and some brown. And make sure to pay attention to the actual shape of the middle of the flower. It's not a perfect circle because it's at an angle, so we're going to kind of make it thinner up at the top and kind of come down wider at the bottom, so it looks like it's somewhat turned just a little bit. I'm going to use pretty much that same mixture that I did for the middle part of the flower for the side part of the leaves that are coming up off of the sunflower. So this is like the green leafy part on the on the sunflower. So just, I'm using a larger angled flat brush right now. I really like that for doing leaves and flower petals and just edges of things like that. So it's very helpful. So just keep going back and forth looking at your reference photo. I'm just gonna go ahead and start on this area too. As you can see, the middle part of this side of the leaf is somewhat brighter and more yellow in the middle. So the edges are kind of more green. So I'm going to try to focus on kind of using that pattern within my painting so I can achieve the look of it kind of being folded over onto the sand. I'm just blocking most of this in right now. This isn't just the final detail. This is just kind of like blocking my lights and darks in and things like that. So as you're looking at the reference photo, you can see that the edge of the middle part of the flower is more of like a orange brown color. So we're gonna go ahead and try to block that part of it in. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a very small angled brush and I'm going to start detailing this side of the petal or the leaf of the flower. As you can see in the picture, it's not too detailed and we're going to be covering it up with some of the flower petals. So like I said, you don't have to worry too much about detail. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting the flower petals on, and I'm starting out a lot darker than I need to be because we want some room to add some detail. I'm not going to be copying these flower petals like exactly how they are on the flower. I'm kind of just adding petals where I want to add them, and it's just easier for me to do it that way. You can copy the photo if that's easier for you, but for me, I just kind of like to go at it with my own thing. So I'm gonna start adding these petals on, and I'm gonna be retouching the petals quite often throughout the painting because I just feel like I really needed to build up the highlights and things like that on there. So I'm just gonna go ahead and keep going back and touching up things, and just make sure that you're starting out darker than you intend, so that way, like I said, you have some good shadows to work with. I'm taking a little bit of olive green, and I've got a really small round brush, and I'm just dotting that on where the green part is in the middle of the flower, and then up around that top part of the flower it gradually gets more orange and brown. So I'm just going to be working that in. So mostly what I'm trying to concentrate on is getting the edges of the flower petals lighter and the inside of the flower petals darker so that you can see the different shadows and things like that. And when I use a darker shadow, I tend to go on the orange side, so like a dark orange. And I'm just kind of going back through and retouching the petals quite often to bring out the shadows and the highlights on it once everything kind of dries in between. So like for instance, this petal right here that I'm putting in is just straight cadmium yellow. But some of the other ones I'm going to use Indian yellow for like the more orange petals. I'm gonna go ahead and start working on the bright sun, and I'm gonna be doing a lot of glazing, like I'm using a lot of water, and I'm just gonna keep going over the sun and blending it out and using my brush to kind of bring it towards the sunflower as somewhat of a sun rays. So the more that you glaze like really light layers, it's gonna blend it out really good, and it's also gonna give it a lot of depth. So I'm taking straight white and I'm just gonna keep working this in. You'll see me kind of retouching this area a lot as well too. I want certain layers to dry in between so that way I can just keep blending it out and going back over it and brightening things up and blending it out. It's just kind of like a back and forth process, and so that's kind of, you know, what I have to do when I want to glaze. So I'm going back through and kind of incorporating some darker tones with that Indian yellow. Kind of concentrating more on the inside of the petal. I'm taking black and I kind of mixed it in with a bunch of different colors. I didn't want it like completely black, but I am kind of outlining the flower petals with the black. I want the base of the reflection closer to the actual flower itself to be darker in like in the reflection. So I'm just kind of bringing that dark black color up, and I'm going to put it on the left side of the leaf as well too. Is I kind of cut off that flower petal because I wanted it to look like it was dipped into the water. So I'm taking a little bit of like a light blue white color, and I'm just kind of like going at the base of the flower and just doing like little circles around the edge of the petal, which is basically on the water, to make it look just like little tiny ripples or like a little water line up against the petal. I did, as you can see, darken up the reflection a little too much, so I'm gonna go back through that with more of a color that we used originally for the reflection, like a dark mauve, and kind of lighten that up just a tad. It was just a little too dark. So now that I've got the reflection, the color that I want, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to use a little bit of white in that mauve mixture that I had to use for the reflection. And I'm going to take a lot of water on my brush, and I'm gonna use that to create some little other different types of reflections in the water, just so it kind of gives it an extra, just an extra little bit of depth. So you're just glazing, like I said, you don't want straight paint on your brush, you want a lot of water. So lots of water, and just do little straight lines back and forth all over the foreground of the water here. So now I'm going to go ahead and start adding in just a little more shadows on the left side of the flower. And I've got some Indian yellow and some burnt umber that I'm going to be applying for that. Just right closer to the base of the flower. So try to leave the tips of the petals lighter in color. I've given the middle part of the flower time to dry, so I'm going to go over it, and I'm just dotting on very pale yellow right on the tips of those, the middle parts of the flower. So I'm just gonna go over that and just keep incorporating that in there to give it a little more texture. So I'm trying to make my brush strokes a little longer around the edge of the flower, the base of the flower, the middle part, and then I'm doing just smaller dots right in the middle. Because if you look at the picture, you can kind of see like the middle stems are kind of coming out a little bit at the edge. So now that I've incorporated that dark brownish orange color on the petals, and that has had time to dry, I'm gonna really start bringing out the highlights. And so I'm mixing up a little bit of that cad yellow, some white, and I'm just gonna go over certain areas. I'm not covering the whole entire petal, just doing little swipes up to give it a little more texture and to just brighten up those highlights just a tad. very clean fan brush, and I'm very lightly with pretty much almost all water and some yellow. I'm just kind of swiping down a little bit from the sun. I'm going to go over this quite a bit, but I'm going to start working on the sun to really brighten this up and to give the illusion of some pretty sun rays hitting the sunflower. So it is going to be a little bit of a process because I'm going to be working, like I said, with mostly water, so I'm going to be doing a lot of layering. So just bear with me. It's probably going to go through a stage where it looks a little scary, but it will get there. So I'm just going to keep letting these layers kind of dry in between just a little bit. So I've got more paint on my brush this time. I'm pretty much using just pretty much white paint, but I'm dragging it up a little bit and I'm working with the fan brush still, and I'm kind of just swiping out, trying to just give sun rays all across in this area, but I'm making sure to blend very good. And I am going to go back through and kind of go over this part a little bit with some more yellow, but As you get down towards the flower petals, you really want to make sure that you're not using a ton of paint, because you want to see a little bit of those petals through the sun rays. Yellow and kind of swiping up into the sun. Of the sun down here in the water just a little bit. Again, this is kind of blurred back here, so you don't have to be too detailed, but I am making sure that I'm brightening this spot up just a tad. the burnt umber and just kind of blotting it on right down in the area where the sun rays kind of start to ease up, just to try to give it a little bit more contrast. Just kind of creating little sparkles within the water. So I'm just taking like a light blue color and just dotting and then blending with my finger. And after I get done doing that, I'm going to take my blue color and thin it down, and I'm going to add a little bit more reflection over this with some just bluer tones. So you really just want barely any paint on your brush. See how I'm going over that reflection, and you can still see the flower of the reflection of the flower still underneath this paint. So just very light paint. And this is pretty much the final step of the painting. I really love doing sunflower paintings. I never used to love them as much until I started painting them. But I did have a lot of fun creating this one, and I hope that you guys will too. And at the very least, I hope that you learned something from this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch the videos that I put out for you. And if you have not subscribed already and enjoyed this video, please make sure to do so. And also don't forget to hit that notification bell to be alerted of my upcoming videos.